How are you? I hope you're staying well, staying safe during these extraordinary times we're living through. And it's just gone 9 o'clock here in Portstewart in Northern Ireland on the North Coast. And I'm continuing with my readings from my books this evening. At the minute, I'm reading Breadboy, Teenage Kicks and Tatey Bread, What Paperboy Did Next. And we're up to chapter 6 this evening, and it's another tale of teenage romance. So, thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoy this. I'll take a wee break in the middle and say hello to people as you're joining us as we go along. So, anyway, chapter 6 of Breadboy, Lunch and Duty. The day of the school disco had come, so it had. It was just over a week since Judy had accepted my invitation to a date in the dinner hall. There was no telling whether the bomb scare or the prospect of our date had set Judy's heart racing the most that day. As the school disco drew closer, it was my heart that began to flutter with the expectation of a proper date with a real live girl from up the Antrim Road. When I was a wee kid, I discovered I had a disturbing medical condition called a heart murmur, and I was always concerned that a heart flutter might result in a cardiac arrest. So I tried to reassure myself that Jesus would not allow anything as pure as my love for Judy to kill me. The disco was all set for a Saturday. It meant an exceptionally busy day for me. I had to deliver the bread with Leslie in the morning, tackle my father's mammoth Ulster fry for lunch, take Judy to the disco in the afternoon, return home from my mother's fish fingers and smash, and then head to the Westy disco in the evening. 2 discos in one day may have seemed like a lot for an ordinary boy, but I was up for the challenge. John Travolta had to be going to at least 2 discos a day, I thought, although probably not in a grammar school dinner hall and a Presbyterian Nissen hut. More importantly, this was to be my first date with the lovely Judy, and I was prepared to go to as many discos a day as necessary for the slightest chance of a slow dance to the Bee Gees. There was a song on the soundtrack of Saturday Night Fever called More Than a Woman, but I wasn't demanding that Judy be more than a woman. I wanted her just to be my girl. The day started well. My wonderful plastic alarm clock served its purpose, and I woke up in time for the downtown radio news and Eamon Malley's farming roundup. The IRA had burnt down a Protestant sweetie shop on the Springfield Road, and heifers in Ballymena were the same price as last week. As I jumped out of bed, I had a vague recollection of a dream where I was the star of the school play and forgot all my lines on the opening night, and everyone laughed at me until Wonder Woman came to my rescue with a lasso. Leslie was in particularly good form that morning because he had just received a personal security briefing from the RUC regarding the current level of terrorist threat. He was visibly delighted to be privy to such classified intelligence information. He must have felt like James Bond, but with a mini shop instead of an Aston Martin. "Come here till I tell you. Them Comanches is turning the Falls Road into a no-go area," he explained, "and the cowboys round here are just as bad." Leslie often drew upon the premise of a good John Wayne movie to enhance my understanding of the latest security situation. The bread round went almost without a hitch that morning. There were only 2 incidents worthy of note. The first of these involved a sudden and mysterious increase in the appetite of Mrs. Dunn, who sold lipstick and lemsip in the chemists. A note had been sellotaped to her windowsill requesting a double order of soda farls, potato bread, and plain loaves. This appeared to confirm the suspicion I'd heard my mother express to my Auntie Hetty the previous week. "Your man with the ferrets from the brickworks has moved in with your woman with the makeup from the chemists." Come here till I tell ye, son, whispered Leslie, as he dutifully fulfilled Mrs. Dunn's increased order. You need to watch women like her, you know. I normally appreciated Leslie's sage advice about matters beyond bread. I had no idea how my boss knew that I did indeed have an urge to watch Mrs. Dunn on a Saturday morning. She was one of very few customers who wore makeup so early in the morning, and when she smiled at me in her dressing gown over her wee pink nightie with her blonde hair in a bob like Jill in Crossroads, she was lovely, so she was. Mrs. Dunn was very popular with most of the men who made door-to-door deliveries in the Upper Shankill. She often invited the various service providers into her house for a wee cup of tea, and they must have talked for ages, because sometimes they'd be hours with her in there. My mother said poor Mrs. Dunn was lonely because Mr. Dunn with the cravat had moved across the water without her. I noticed that Mrs. Dunn never invited Leslie inside to sample her hospitality. She must have realised that even the warmth of her welcome could not shake Leslie's unwavering commitment to top-class bread delivery for the Ormo bakery. As I carefully used my chin to help balance a bowl of extra loaf done in the brickman, who should appear in the street beside me but Irene Maxwell? This came as something of a surprise, as it was very unusual for other people of my age to be awake so early on a Saturday morning. Hiya, she said sweetly. Irene was wearing blue eyeshadow like Agnetha from ABBA and a satin blue jacket over her unoccupied boob tube. She must have got up very early that morning to apply the eyeshadow, I thought, possibly in the dark, as the makeup was very smudged. Sometimes girls were very hard to understand. Hiya, I replied, while keeping my chin firmly planted on a plain loaf at the top of my pile of bread from Mrs. Dunn. Whenever I did this, the smell of fresh bread was overwhelming, and I was tempted to puncture a hole in the packaging with my chin and devour fresh bread. Irene was less of a temptation. Are you still coming with me to see Saturday Night Fever at the BBC? She inquired earnestly. I replied. Irene smiled, as if I was John Travolta himself. I did not reciprocate because, in spite of her early morning efforts, Irene was no Agnetha. See ya, she gushed, and off she went. If Mrs. Dunn's order on her windowsill and returned to the Ormo mini shop, I reflected on this strange early morning encounter. It was the first time I had spoken to Irene since the unfortunate chewing gum incident at the Westie Disco. I was relieved that she no longer found me completely disgusting, but I was concerned that Irene was misconstruing the nature of our trip to see Saturday Night Fever. In my eyes, I was going to the movies with a bunch of mates, but I got the distinct impression from Irene Maxwell that she regarded this rendezvous as a personal date with me. She's fond, I thought, wishful thinking on her part. I was pleased that Irene couldn't resist my sex appeal, but she simply wasn't my type. Judy Carton was pure Wonder Woman. Irene Maxwell was more like the annoying wee in Scooby-Doo. Big Duff's new glasses were the main talking point when we got to the big estate that morning. Did you hear Big Duff's got a pair of them photochromic glasses? Whispered Mrs. Rossbottom as she carried an armful of muffins and gravy rings down the steps of the Ormo shop. The same boy doesn't like no one seeing what's going on behind them there eyes of his, added enormous Mr. Rossbottom in an even quieter whisper as he dismounted from the mini shop with 12 plain loaves to see him through the weekend. I was always fascinated by the fashionable eyewear countries. They wore sunglasses, pop stars or film stars from Hollywood, or at least it was sunny. And it was incredible that paramilitaries on both sides wore the same sunglasses. This was one thing they had in common, apart from killing people. Maybe this shared appreciation would provide, excuse me, would provide some chink of light for peace in the future. Apparently, the lenses in Big Duff's new glasses went magically dark in daylight. Big Duff often wore glasses even on the darkest of days, the same as the Fawns. He was taking a risk, though. What if he got arrested because the RUC recognised the sunglasses he was wearing over his balaclava? When Billy Cooper's granny with the curlers arrived into the van before Leslie could greet her with so much as a "What about you, love?" she began, "Have you heard the Lord and Master?" This was the disrespectful way people in the estate described Big Duff when they weren't in the presence of one of his relatives or foot soldiers. "He must be doing very well for himself. He's got himself a pair of pornographic glasses," explained Billy's granny. This sounded like Jones in chemistry might like. "I think they're called photochromatic," intervened Leslie, "because they change in the light, so they do." "And why would your man want to hide his eyes in the daylight?" asked Billy's granny accusatorily. This question intrigued me. Why would a paramilitary want to hide his eyes from the sunlight? Was she suggesting that Big Duff was a vampire, like Christopher Lee? We did not have to wait long to find out the answer to these questions, because suddenly Big Duff himself strode up the steps and into the mini shop, wearing the very glasses that had sparked such debate in the estate. No sooner had Big Duff made his entrance than Billy's granny demanded, "A pan, a plain, 2 soda and 2 potato," and she scurried down the steps, clutching her bread. Big Duff carried clout into the confines of the mini shop. He always talked as if he was in charge. For a moment, he just stood there, his glasses slowly turning lighter as he inspected the fairy cakes and coconut slices. I knew he was waiting for his swanky spectacles to be acknowledged. I began to fiddle nervously with a ring pull of a 7-Up can until at last Leslie bravely broke the ice. "Is them new glasses you've got there, sir?" he inquired. "Aye, latest thing," Big Duff said proudly. He proceeded to take off his photomathingy glasses and then said to me, "Come here and I'll show you how they work, son." My heart began to beat faster. I was being summoned by a paramilitary. But I was the only pacifist teenager in West Belfast. I should decline this invitation to consort with the devil. This was my opportunity to convince Big Duff that there was a better way. I should speak up for peace, like that black preacher in America and that wee Indian man with the round glasses from my history books. "Aye," I replied. Big Duff showed me his glasses, how they worked by putting his hand over the lens and then exposing them to sunlight again. They went dark and then clear depending on the light. It was like Paul Daniels doing a magic trick on TV. Big Duff then went on to explain to me in great detail how the glasses worked. He sounded more like Raymond Baxter on Tomorrow's World than a paramilitary. Once he had completed the scientific explanation, he said, "Right now, you try them on, son." Although the last thing I wanted to do was to put on his glasses. I obeyed, of course, but I was very jumpy. What if I dropped them? He would kill me. So that's how I found myself trying on the glasses of the most feared man in the Upper Shankill. I got to see the world through his lenses. The world in front of me was nothing but a dark and unpleasant blur. Then I wondered what horrible scenes had been viewed through these glasses under Big Duff's command. I was certain a pacifist should not be wearing a paramilitary's glasses, and so I quickly took them off and silently asked Jesus to forgive me. "Thanks, Big Duff, they're class," I gushed and moved on swiftly by saying, "Do you want jam or sugar Paris buns this week?" "Jam, son," he said, and I obeyed. So I'll stop there for a wee minute and say hello. So who's with us this evening? Hello, Nigel McComb. and Mark McCauley. Hi, Evelyn Brown, Ali Bennett, all the regulars are here. Good to see you all along. Hi, Jim Poole, and the lovely Leslie is downstairs this evening. Hello, Anne Kirk. I like your wee panda emoji. And hello, yes, from Zoe as well, is with Ali. Great to have you again. Hi, Tony from Vancouver, Canada. Sheila McCune, lovely to have you, Sheila. Hi, Maureen Robertson. And Aisling, oh, good to have you along, Aisling. Hope you're doing well. One of the stars of Paperboy, the musical. Hello, Anne Riding, and Philip Orr, and Mike Moran, Laura Hughes, Betty O'Riordan. Hi, Tony, missed last night's reading, but caught up this morning. Oh, good. So you're catching up rightly. Hi, Pete Sapura and Brendan Toll. Got here early tonight. You couldn't wait, Laura Hughes. Oh, that's brilliant. I'm glad you got here on time. Hello, Damien in Edinburgh. Hope you're all safe and well over there. Hi, Tony, enjoying Breadboy. Francis McGrath. Hi, Jim and Mo from Somerset. Dayton, lovely to have you along. Jim, hello, Michael McKinley Sr. Says, lockdown not so bad with Tony. Oh, that's very nice. We need something to get us through it, don't we? And hi, Brian Smith in Macrofelt, and Jeremy Skillen in Belfast, Jim McCauley, and Neil Vance. Lovely to have you all with me this evening. So I'm going to continue the story of Luncheon Duty, and this is the day of the school disco. This is an important moment for me. But meanwhile, I have to finish my bread round before we get to the romance part. Oh, hello again, Norma Fleming. By the time I got home for my Ulster fry, I was already feeling a little tired. After fried eggs, pancakes, soda and potato bread, sausages and bacon and both pudding, I was feeling sleepy. Nevertheless, spurred on by the thought of my imminent first date with Judy Carlton, I claimed the bathroom. I inspected my chin and upper lip, a darkening of the fluffy hairs, but still not enough to merit an attempt at a shave. So I washed my face with Clearasil and splashed on some denim aftershave. Then I put on my best flared jeans, white cap-sleeve t-shirt and newly polished platform shoes. I completed the preparations by brushing my hair into a Travolta quiff, held in place with a puff of my mother's Harmony hairspray. When I emerged from the bathroom, my big brother was waiting impatiently outside. He immediately sniffed out my weakness. Are you wearing women's hairspray, you big fruit? He inquired. I ignored this latest affront to my masculinity because in my mind I was already on the dance floor in the school dinner hall dancing with Judy to How Deep Is Your Love. Judy and I had shared this floor before because we had once sat at the same table for lunch. As I devoured my vegetable roll, I watched from the other end of the table as she delicately sipped pink custard from her spoon. I was certain that following this afternoon's date at the school disco, Judy and I would be sitting together having lunch every day. The only remaining obstacle was securing an appropriate mode of transport to get me to the school disco on time. Belfast Royal Academy was about 3 miles from home. There was no direct bus route to the school, so I usually travelled there by taking a red bus or a black taxi into the city centre and then another bus from the City Hall up the Cliftonville Road. I could have walked there in about half an hour from the City Hall, but the route in question was now being called Murder Mile, and I was intent on arriving alive for Judy. I couldn't risk being late in case she thought I'd stood her up on our very first date. So I was left with only one viable option. I would have to beg for a lift to school in my father's Ford Escort Respray. In the Upper Shankill, our car was rather impressive, but beside all the Rovers and Toyotas with plastic bumpers outside BRA, it was an embarrassment. It wasn't that the Respray had been a total disaster, but 2 years on, a few scrapes had revealed the metallic blue hidden underneath the new red paint. As far as I was concerned, the car screamed poor, and that was the last impression I wanted to give Judy, because I knew her father drove a classy Austin Allegro with real wood on the dashboard. Joanna left over to your wee disco? Asked Daddy generously. Aye, I replied helplessly. On the journey, I could tell my DJ father was a little concerned about the competition put up by this new disco. I bet they'll not have as many good records as the Westie. Well, sure, we've got all the best singles going back as far as Puppet on a String. I decided not to point out that Sandy Shaw was unlikely to be in great demand in the era of Saturday Night Fever, not least because I was worrying about how to hide my shameful mode of transport. Sure, lead me round the corner, Daddy. We're a bit early, so I can walk the rest, I said nonchalantly. My father's reply hit me like a Cyberman's ray gun. No son of mine's turning into no wee prig, he barked. He had spotted my snobbery a mile off. As my mother always said, he's a very clever man, you know. Never you be ashamed of where you come from, son. You're as good as anybody, and nobody's better than you. Don't you ever forget that. When are we getting a new car? Was my insensitive response. We'll see, replied my father. In spite of the scolding, he capitulated and dropped me off around the corner. So I walked the distance of the final street past BMWs and gleaming Chrysler sunbeams. As I passed my middle-class mates slamming posh car doors behind them, I imagined that one day my father could afford to put a Chrysler sunbeam in my life, and it would put a smile on my face, just like Petula Clark promised in the song on the advert. Maybe that day was coming soon, given my father's remark about the possibility of a new car, and then I could drive and arrive with all the others at the school gate. I entered the school grounds, and the Gothic Belfast Royal Academy looked down upon me. This oldest part of our historic grammar school seemed to be scowling at the impertinence of the prospect of this first ever disco on its proud premises. I myself found it hard to believe that the same senior school orchestra practiced the Enigma variations would soon be resounding with the Electric Light Orchestra with Mr. Blue Sky. The first friend I met was Thomas O'Hara in his Peter Storm anorak, which seemed an appropriate attire for a disco. But it was raining as usual, so he had the hood up and he was sucking on the drawstrings. Hiya, said Thomas. All right, I replied. Aye, you all right? Responded Thomas. Aye. This conversation was really taking off. I spotted Frankie Jones in the queue and noticed that he was a sight for sore eyes. He was wearing a blue plastic bomber jacket from John Fraser's, which was quite cool, but his face was an absolute bloodbath. He had little patches of pink toilet paper attached to an array of bleeding spots. I could smell brute and aftershave that brought back painful personal memories for me. What happened to you, Frankie? I asked. Cut myself shaving, so I did, answered Frankie. Thomas and I winced. I would tell we were both thinking the same thing. It was better to avoid attempting a premature shave if these were the bloody consequences. Frankie would have no chance of getting a girl at the disco looking like that. Before we had a chance to discuss our shaving routines further, the side door of the school opened and everyone began to stream into the dinner hall. I caught a brief glimpse of Judy at the front of the queue, and I thought this just proved how keen she was to be here with me. However, I was a little disappointed when she ran inside with her friends rather than waiting outside for me. I would have waited for her if the platform had been on the other foot. After paying 20p for the African babies, we were allowed into the dinner hall. As Thomas was pulling his Peter Storm off over his head, I just stood in awe, transfixed by the transformation. The windows were covered in coloured paper from the art department, and there were flashing spotlights that had been borrowed from above the stage in the assembly hall. At the front of the hall was a brand new set of double decks and speakers with lights built into them. It had never occurred to me that anything could make the Westie disco look inferior, but this made it look The difference was there were very few of us here compared to the usual crowd of 400 at the Westie disco. No one was dancing, even though the teacher DJ, who was much younger than my father, had just put on The Rivers of Babylon. But these thoughts were a momentary distraction because my attention was now focused on Judy Carlton. I spotted her sitting in the corner of the dining hall beside the hatch for slobs. She was chatting to several of her friends, including Joanne Galt, Helen Burnside, and Denise Clyde, who were all rather attractive in their own right and very smart at most subjects. The best looking girls always seemed to hang around together. Poor Judy still hadn't noticed that her arrived, so I decided to stride across the dance floor to take her hand. I left Thomas and Frankie standing at the dinner hall where the plastic chairs were stacked. As I made my way towards my girl, the teacher DJ faded out Cats and Dogs by Brian and Michael, which had unsurprisingly attracted nobody onto the dance floor. My father would never have played such a song to teenagers, but the teacher must have thought it was educational because it was about some old painter. As the DJ faded out his unfortunate mistake, I continued to walk in Judy's direction, and as I did, as if by design, he faded up Night Fever. I recognised the song from the very first disco beat. This was perfect. As I strode towards my girlfriend, I began to imagine I was John Travolta strutting down a street in New York. In fact, if it hadn't been for the residual whiff of Friday's fish and chips, I would have completely forgotten I was in our school dinner hall. All my years of disco experience, honed in the furnace of the Westie disco, was proving very useful today. As I drew closer to the circle of girls in the corner, I noticed all were smiling and tapping their feet and dancing slightly in their chairs. It was a girl's way of communicating the words, "Please ask me to dance with you." Just then, Judy looked up, and I caught her eye. She looked away shyly at first, and then returned my gaze, as if to check that I was really heading her way. She looked away again nervously, which was fair enough for a first date, but disconcertingly enough for me to lose some of my swagger, and I stumbled on my platforms as I arrived in front of her. Regaining my composure, I initiated first contact. "Hiya," I said. "Hiya," Judy replied, with the sweetest of smiles. "Do you want to dance?" I inquired gallantly. At this point I noticed Joanne Galt, Helen Burnside, and Denise Clyde seemed to be trying to suppress some laughter. I glanced behind me to see if someone was doing a silly impersonation of Travolta on the dance floor, but it remained deserted. When I returned my eyes to Judy, she began to giggle. The more she giggled, the more her three friends were unable to contain their mirth, and within seconds, all four girls were giggling around me. I understood well that sometimes girls giggled when they were embarrassed about being very attracted to a boy. The Form 1 hockey girls giggled every time Timothy Longsley walked across the playground. But I was beginning to feel uncomfortable with this developing state of affairs. "Do you want to dance, Judy?" I repeated. I loved to use her name to her face. "No, thank you," replied Judy, looking towards the empty dance floor. The world stopped turning. She had said no. It was a lovely, soft and polite no, but it was a no nonetheless. "But I thought you—" I could not complete the sentence because the giggling around me had now resumed with added vigour. Sound like those bloody Martian robots in the Smash advert. How could Judy agree to go on a date with me and then turn me down so publicly? As humiliation began to dawn, I hit a reddener, but thankfully no one could see my blushes because in the dimmed colour lights, all our faces looked red. I glanced back quickly to see if Frankie and Thomas or anyone else was observing my rejection, and I sensed many eyes focused on this corner of the dinner hall. So I made an instant decision. Leslie sometimes did when he took an alternative route if he spotted a potential hijacker on a Saturday morning. Partly to punish Judy, and partly I turned to Helen Burnside. "Do you want to dance?" Helen shook her head between giggles. Then I turned to Denise Clyde. Do you want to dance? Received the same devastating response. Now I was starting to panic. This would be the talk of the school. I would be slagged for weeks. This would be nearly as bad as when the domestic science teacher caught Frankie Jones fiddling with himself in the locker room. In a final act of desperation, I looked at Joanne Galt. She must have seen the pleading in my eyes, but I should have known better to even ask the question. Do you want to dance? I could have predicted the response. My fate had been sealed. Joanne also declined. The giggles continued, although I noticed Judy had stopped laughing by now and she was looking a little embarrassed. I tried to figure out what had gone so wrong. Why had she changed her mind? Maybe she couldn't dance because it was her time of the month, like when girls brought in a note to say they couldn't do PE. I was confused, but I had to see a face. I had to think on my feet, like Manolito in the High Chaparral, except without a cowboy hat on this occasion. As I turned to walk away from my erstwhile mockers, I said in a loud voice so that as many people in earshot as possible could hear me over the top of the BJs, that's okay. If none of you want to lend me your chemistry notes, that's okay. Sure, who cares about homework anyway? I shrugged my shoulders. Care a whole lot. It took forever to walk across the deserted dance floor to the sound of screeching Bee Gees. I imagined tumbleweed from a Clint Eastwood western blowing across the floor in my direction. I was sweating with embarrassment. I had never perspired with mortification before. After a million years, I finally crossed the vacant dance floor and reached the back of the hall. I stood beside Thomas nonchalantly, as if I just popped out for a sly smoke or something. Turned you down then, he said. The afternoon did not improve. As we came to the last half hour of the disco, there was a shared realisation that if no one got up to dance soon, we would have had the very first dance-free disco of all time. It was more Saturday afternoon chill than Saturday night fever. As we entered the final 20 minutes, Frankie Jones, complete with his butchered face, asked Helen Burnside to dance, and unbelievably, she agreed, and there they were, up on the floor for Dancing Queen. Everyone was up. I didn't dare to try again, so I remained at the back wall with Thomas, who had already put on his Peter Storm anorak again, ready for going home. As we entered the last 5 minutes, the teacher DJ put on a slow one by 10cc. I was comforted by the fact that at least Judy hadn't got up to dance with anyone else. But then, as if he had been planning it all along, Timothy Longsley arrived late for the last dance. He was in a school uniform and his face retained some muck from a rugby scrum earlier in the day. He spoke to no one and walked across the floor casually, scattering giggling first-formers in his wake. He put out his hand to Judy Carton commandingly. I watched with despondency as Judy slowly took Timothy's hand and he led her onto the dance floor for a slow dance to I'm Not in Love. Before the day could deteriorate any further, I decided to leave. The woman in the middle of I'm Not in Love taunted me by whispering, boys don't cry, big boys don't cry, big boys don't cry. I hated that song. I departed the humiliation of the dinner hall without being seen. I walked alone into town, down Murder Mile, because I didn't care. Judy hated me. Worse than that, she had betrayed me with a rugby-playing Timothy with a gîte in France. It wasn't fair. Why did she reject me? Was it because I was so ugly with my spots and all? I bet it was because I was from up the Shankill. Did she really fancy Timothy? When I got home that night, I didn't even bother to go to the Westie disco because now I stayed in alone and watched TV. I didn't laugh once when Mike Yarwood did impressions of Frank Spencer saying, "Ooh, Betty." I was scundered, so I was. There you are. That's chapter 6 of Breadboy. So, let's say hello to a few more people. Hello, Brian Summers and Walter Ellis. And who else have we got here? Bernadette Saunders, Alan McLean, Gillian Much. Hi, Marty McCauley. Glad you're enjoying it. Eugene Martin and what do we see? Fiona Hawkins. Yes, I think you may have been in some of those discos, Fiona. Hi, Neve. Lovely to have you along. And listen from Louisville, Mark McCauley, one of the worldwide clan McCauley. Good to have you. Hello, Murphy Marion and Andy McCauley and Parsley and Paul Grudgings, another BRAO boy who may have been at one of those school discos. So lovely to have you all here this evening. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me. Until tomorrow night, same time, stay home, stay well, and stay positive.